Hello and welcome to Libero, the podcast about the most important of the least important things, as Austin McPhee once said. Firstly, we want to say a big thank you very much to all of you for listening and for interacting. We're very grateful for it. We need it. Please keep it coming on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, X, and Blue Sky. So today I'm joined by the Baron of Bethnal Green, John Brewin. Hi, John. And the man they're calling the start holder of Wandsworth, Jonathan Wilson.
The start holder?
Yeah, like a kind of Dutch, like the kind of
start like that. Sorry, yeah, with double A. Yeah, sorry, yeah. No, happy to do that.
I don't know where that came from, but I felt it suited you. So today we're going to talk about the Premier League, and specifically you guys were both at Premier League games this weekend. John, you were at the Amex.
I was, a regular haunt of mine these days, and I do enjoy it down there. Brighton's best performance this season, over 90 minutes, a rare clean sheet. And when you go to Brighton, this is how it works. You see another young player that you think, where did they get him from? And this time it's Diego Gomez from MLS into Miami, David Beckham's. Yeah, they were really good. Leeds fans, if you're listening, I think you know that your team was no good in this game. Probably their worst performance of the season, chatting to some of the local lads. That was beyond them, really. Brighton are playing a level of football, or played a level of football, above Leeds. It's funny with Brighton, you watch them and the talent is there, but because it's talent and it's not flourished, it's not fulfilled, it's not peaking just yet. It can be a bit bitty, but that was the best I've seen them. We know about Minte, what a player he is. If he could add a finishing touch, a final ball, they'll be getting another 9 figures sale on that, which is part of the model. Went to that and then rushed back to London. Went to the Barbican, which is very nice to see public service broadcasting headed by my old mate John. Good Saturday for me. Not sure about the rest of the football though.
Whenever I watch Leeds this season, I think that there's quite a lot of industry there, but there's not really a lot of quality, right? You kind of assumed that having come back up, having sold a lot of good players, particularly the first season, after they came down when they sold Gray, Somerville, Rutter, and so on, that they would need to replace quality, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of quality in that team.
No, that's the complaint from fans. I mean, Rutter supplied the third goal for Brighton, and there's a player that they really do miss. I suppose that's the issue, isn't it? If you get relegated, you have to sell off the family silver, and unlike Brighton, there isn't a conveyor belt of it. So you've sold it, and then you have to make do and mend. There's quite a few doubts, aren't there, in Daniel Farke because of his record of getting relegated. I like him as a manager. I like the way he's completely honest about the way things are. But I do fear for him. Because you look at Brighton, and that's the model that teams are trying to follow. But it's really hard to replicate. Because we've seen it, haven't we, where people have taken away the scouting team, taken away the managers, taken away the players. No one's yet got to become the new Brighton, have they? The success of what Tony Blue's done there, it continues, really.
This is, to me, this is, I think, the most interesting and important thing about Brighton, right, is that you can take Dan Ashworth, or you can take Graham Potter, or you can take, the various scouts and sporting directors. But unless you have the actual, Star Lizard, Jamestown IP, you're not going to be able to replicate what they do, because that is kind of the magic of it, right? Is having the computer, or having the computer algorithm, whatever you want to call it, which tells you that actually this guy, the Paraguay international playing for Inter Miami, can cut it in the Premier League and is worth going for. But if you don't have that IP, you can't do it.
Well, and what they've done incredibly well, and I think this is where a lot of teams really struggle, that you can do it with one generation. You get a load of good young players together, you get promoted, you sell half a dozen of them off, and then replacing them is incredibly hard. And that's obviously where the algorithm helps. It's not just the eye of one scout. It's very, very systematic. And so you look at Sunderland this season, they've clearly recruited incredibly well this summer. I mean, even if they go down, they've recruited very, very well. But the issue is what happens when they sell Siddiqui or when they sell Talby. Is this just they spent 3 or 4 years working out who their targets were? Brilliant, they've got them. But is there another range of targets? And is there another one? And is there another one? And are they still noticing them, the players who are now sort of 11 or 12 who are going to sign in 6 years? Do they know who they are already? Do they have a system in place to identify them? So that's why Brighton have been incredibly impressive. That, the idea of a team coming up, selling a generation of players, getting a new generation in, we've seen that before. It's doing it again and again and again, having a model that seems to be able to sustain itself. That's what makes them different.
I think Brighton, there is a patience there, though, isn't there, within the club? That's part of it. I've been chatting to fans quite a lot because I spend a bit of time down there, and they do have this thing where, maybe Caicedo went a season ahead, and then someone wanted to buy Baleba maybe a season ahead. This planning was all there, but it was felt earlier in the season that they'd been left maybe a little bit short because that they hadn't bought the players in, and they maybe Fabian Herzl was operating with a team with not enough experience in it, which I know that was Roberto De Zerbi's great complaint. But it's done the Tony Bloom way, and actually as a fan base, I think the fans are pretty accepting of how it works. But at a club like Sunderland or Leeds, ambition might mean that they overspend or they go away from the model. And we've seen, actually, like, look at Liverpool, who righted their slump over the weekend, but they changed away from their model and have had big problems as a result of it. And I suppose it's belief in the system. We've seen it actually with Brentford as well. They lost Thomas Frank, and okay, they're probably going to be towards the end, bottom of the Premier League, but it's belief in the system, belief in the process, and patience with it that's going to put you in a good position. Impatience is the great enemy of many football clubs.
Absolutely. And Jonathan, yesterday you saw, a very process-led team in Bournemouth, who were probably the closest thing in the last year or two to Brighton, going to Manchester City and losing. What did you make of that game?
It's very strange. I mean, I thought City were always going to win it. It was, after sort of 20 minutes or so, it was obvious that City were just better. But they conceded more chances than I think they'd like. And it's quite strange watching them now that they don't seem one thing or the other, that there are elements of old school Guardiola that if you look at their 5 midfielders yesterday, 4 of them are under 1m80, 3 of them are under 1m75. Having Cherki and Foden and Doku and Bernardo Silva in the same team, there's no other Premier League team is playing with players that small, that technical. And I know this is very relevant to what we're going to go on to. City haven't scored a goal from a set play yet this season, the only Premier League team of whom that's true. And yet they had under 50% possession, which is at home against Bournemouth is mind-boggling for City compared to what they were. And how do the first 2 goals come? Well, they're both pretty direct balls over the top. Not over the top, but through the back line for Holland to run onto from Cherki. The first one a header, the second one a very smart pass. And that's exactly the sort of goal that Guardiola used to discourage because he feels that leaves them vulnerable to a counter-attack. But that interview he gave in January, more and more, I think that's really key. I think we all read it as he was saying he needed more runners, he needed to be less predictable. But actually, if you look at the broader context, he's saying there is no time to prepare the game for my style of football, and therefore we have to compromise. And that means accepting we might be vulnerable on the break by playing these direct passes to Haaland. But they're really relying on Haaland. I mean, do you know who City's second top scorer this season is after Haaland?
Nick O'Reilly.
It's Esteve of Burnley, who got 2 own goals.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good. Yeah. Wow.
So they really are relying on him. If his goals dry up, I mean, no sign yet that they will. He's got, is it 26 and 16 for club and country this season, I think? Yeah. But I mean, there will be a slowdown at some point, surely. Or if he gets injured, I'm not really sure what they do.
I mean, it's clearly the most dependent City have been throughout the Pep era on one player, right? Like even at their best, De Bruyne, David Silva, Aguero, they were never as dependent on one player as they are now. Not even close. Like De Bruyne was even in De Bruyne's peak years, like he missed about a year, the best part of a year with injury, didn't he? And they kind of just carried on fine without him. Does it make you think, I don't want to linger on City too much, but does it make you think, Jonathan, that gives City a brittleness, right? Like say Arsenal don't have, right? Because Arsenal, even say, I don't know, Declan Rice, or David Raya, Arsenal are not as dependent on any one individual as Manchester City are on Erling Haaland.
I think brittle is exactly the word, both for that reason that they are dependent on Haaland, but also they just give up chances on the break. I think there's huge pressure on Matheus Nunes, just the way that they're playing this season, that Foden and Cherki both drift in off that right flank and they leave him quite exposed. It's fine if they've got the ball. It's fine if they're playing the opposition half. But as we just said, they didn't have more than half the ball. So I think that does create pressure on that flank. It happens to an extent on the other side. Doku does drift in. Nico O'Reilly obviously gets forward. It happens on the left as well, that Doku does drift in. Not as much as either Foden or Cherki. And Nico O'Reilly gets forward a lot. So I think there are vulnerabilities on the flanks, but they're vulnerable from set plays as well. I mean, that was only the second goal they've conceded from a set play, the one that Tyler Adams scored. And personally, I think it probably is a foul. I think probably it shouldn't count. I don't care that David Brooks has let go of Donovan's arm by the time he actually comes to jump for it. If you're holding somebody's arm in the box, that's a foul. You're not allowed to do it. And I won't go on too much about that, because I think we will discuss that kind of issue a little bit more later on. But I didn't have much confidence in City defending set plays.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this topic of set plays and also City's changes, because I think this kind of links us to the big question that we want to explore today, which is something which has been on everyone's mind, I think, throughout the season, but particularly in the last month or so, which is the football that we are watching in the Premier League this season, is it good or bad? Is it boring or interesting? Because there's definitely a growing narrative that the product is worse, and that it's worse because of dependence on set pieces, lack of entertaining football, I think lack of individual entertaining players, and a game that's become in a game that's become less entertaining and exciting than the football that the Premier League is meant to sell to the world. Now, I think there's a lot of different questions there. I don't think they're all exactly the same thing. I want to try and unpack some of that over the course of this episode. Personally, I think that there is, if it feels to me as if there is less football being played, even in this world of, endless football. Like if you watch the Spurs against Chelsea on Saturday was a bizarre game, because Tottenham didn't do anything. Like they almost literally didn't do anything at all over the course of 90 minutes. They finished with an XG of, I think, 0.05, which is, I think, one of the lowest ever recorded. The one moment, quite literally, the one attacking moment they had over the course of 90 minutes was a Kevin Danso long throw, which Rodrigo Bentancur failed to connect with an attempted volley. And if he'd connected with it, it was in a pretty good position. They might well have scored. But to me, that game, and Chelsea were fine. Like they were totally in control throughout. They pressed Tottenham at the right moments. They scored a fantastic goal. They should really have scored more. And so Chelsea were happy with it being a game in which nothing happened once they had the lead. But it struck me that watching that game, and this has been true of many, many games this season, that there is, amongst some teams who are towards the top end of the table, who should be challenging for wins and to finish in a competitive position in the big tournaments, that their teams are kind of happy doing less, right? They're happy creating less, getting on the ball less, relying on set pieces. And I'm just curious as to what you guys think of this. Before we get into the specifics, John, do you feel like there's less football going around at the moment? Or is this are we just seeing this through the lens of Arsenal or Tottenham or just one or two teams?
I think with Tottenham, it's interesting because in my role as a man who watches a lot of teams, beginning with B, I've seen a lot of Brentford, and I saw an awful lot of Thomas Frank. And it's weird that it's come out after that game that Thomas Frank's lack of adventure. Now, one of the things I would never have accused his Brentford team, particularly last season, was a lack of adventure. That I think Frank, Brentford could play a direct style of play, but Frank worked out that if his team scored lots of goals, they had a chance of going up the table and staying away from the relegation zone. And yet at Tottenham, he perhaps doesn't have the tools to do that. And we know that he's a pragmatic manager, so he's amended his style. And it's not working at Tottenham. They've got that terrible home record. They're not great to watch. They're dull. I was at the Tottenham Wolves game with you a few weeks ago, and they were poor in that game as well, weren't they, until the end when they picked it up a little bit. Yeah, overall, I mean, I wouldn't say it's been a completely boring as a season because we've had stories. That's the thing. And, we're in the journalism business. We're in the storytelling business, as again, our American friends call it. Liverpool's fall has been interesting because those games have been exciting because when a team has lots of attackers but is also falling apart at the same time because they're not set up right and they're overamped in one direction, that's good. But actually, cut away beyond that. There's a lot that's quite functional, dull football. And I suppose the set piece aspect of it is a big part of that because it's a lot of managers do appear to use this as some element of a cheat mode. It's much easier, you would expect, to teach your team to run through set pieces and drill those than it is to end up playing Pep Guardiola's top level football, which shows you what a great coach that Iraola is at Bournemouth. Now, they're not without their set play expertise, but I think the key to maybe their loss at Manchester City, and Bournemouth have a terrible record there, though if you go back a year, they were, of course, the opposition. They ended the City's run and they ended the City empire almost at that time, didn't they? That game, which was the end of Kyle Walker's career, essentially, at Manchester City, is that they play this warp speed attacking football. Iraola talks about how it's like the Bilbao style is aggressive, and it takes a lot from English football as he saw it. It's hard to coach that. It's easier to play the set piece game. Now, I'm not saying that Mikel Arteta is cheating, but he's found it easier with a team full of really, really talented players to play a more direct game, and he's found it more successful. I just wonder how long that success can last. And Jonathan is our man of tactical evolution here. I wonder how long that is going to stay in play. It might be by the end of the season, we've forgotten about set-piece ball because there comes a point where it starts coming apart again.
Well, I think there's two slightly separate things here that we got to be slightly careful of getting conflated. So people talk about being bored. Like, that's a subjective thing. If they're bored, then they're bored. That's fine. They're allowed to be bored. A lot of people were bored by Guardiola football. I sort of sense, I don't know if this is true, but I sense that people are looking at this league table now, looking at the way the first 10 games of the season have gone, and are thinking, oh, hang on, Arsenal are going to run away with this. It's going to be a pretty sort of drab title race. It's going to be an Arsenal procession. Arsenal are not a team who sort of thrill you with incredible goals or incredible technique. A lot of their goals come from set plays. It's almost that's been used as a stick to beat them with. I would say the most exciting game this season so far in the league was Newcastle 2, Liverpool 3. Had the lowest ball in play time of any game this season because it was all set plays. The best game, most exciting game I've been to this season was Brentford 3, Liverpool 2, which I don't know exactly what it was, but there was a lot of time there waiting for Michael Coyote to take long throws. And yes, I get that in some kind of like ground sense, we want to watch football being played on the pitch and people, great technique and everything. But the excitement in that stadium as Michael Coyote trots across from right back to the left wing to take a throw in and wipes the ball down, and this whole theatre of him sort of getting prepared, sort of leaning back, his run up. Like, certainly if you're a Brentford fan, but I'd even argue as a neutral, that's more exciting than watching, a back four knocking the ball between itself.
I think that's a really, really interesting, important point. I think we should come back to that. But specifically in the case of Arsenal, which I think is when people talk about the set piece era, the domination of set pieces in this season's Premier League, I think so much of that conversation flows through Arsenal, right? Because you had a team who were, associated for the first few years of Mikel Arteta's tenure with basically playing what was clearly a kind of Pep style possession game. And yet in the last, maybe let's say 2 years, it feels like they've changed direction a lot. They're incredibly physical. They are unbelievably well organized. I almost think the set piece discussion means that they're not quite getting enough praise for the fact that they are one of the greatest defensive teams of the modern era. Like it is bizarre how few shots they concede and opportunities they concede, and that will very much be the bedrock of their title win if they do win it. But clearly, they've gone from being a team who you would overwhelm opposition with possession and technical skill to being a team who's like uncannily good at set pieces. They've scored their 18 Premier League goals this season. They've scored, I think it's 8 corners and 2 penalties. They're really at the cutting edge. They're at the forefront of this new set piece era. And I'm just wondering from you, I'd be curious to hear both your opinions on this. What do you, I guess, let's just start with you, Jonathan. Like, firstly, what do you think it tells us about modern football that Arsenal have decided to go in this direction of set pieces? And do you think there is a degree of snobbery about a team which is meant to be based on, high quality technical players actually becoming very good at something specific like set pieces?
I think that latter point is really interesting. If you look at the data, so this season it's roughly 19% of all goals in the Premier League come from set pieces, which is high. We've never seen it higher than 14 point something percent. But last year we talked about set pieces a lot. That was the lowest we've had since 2013-14. If you look over the history of the Premier League, fundamentally it bobs around 11-12% up to around about sort of 2010-ish, from when it's gone up to sort of 13-14%. Now, that is not what I would have expected. Guardiola ball starts sort of 2008, and my assumption before I looked at the data had been the reliance on plays would have gone down. So I think the first thing to say is we are definitely conditioned by what the elite teams are doing. If a Stoke or a Brentford are scoring a lot of goals from set plays, we sort of don't notice, probably because, as you suggest, we think it's fair enough. When an elite side, when somebody starts threatening to win the league with set plays, it's sort of like, well, shouldn't you be a bit better than that? But I mean, I actually don't think that. I think you should try and win a game of football however you can within the laws. It's not cheating to play like that. What I'd love to know is whether Arteta realised, hang on, I've got Declan Rice, I've got Bukayo Saka, 2 incredibly good deliverers of a set play, and I've got a handful of players who are really good at heading the ball. Let's use this as a strength. Or did he realise, that realisation that came to Guardiola in January when he was saying, I don't have time to play my style of football. Did Arteta have that earlier? Is that what happened? That he sort of noticed, hang on, if we're playing every 3 or 4 days, there is no time to set a team up as precise as I'd like. And therefore the best use of time on the training field is this. Is it that he thought, how are we going to beat City? What are they not so good at? And him obviously coming from the inside of City, did he think, well, hang on, the fact that they're all 5'7" geniuses means that they might be susceptible to balls in the air. Maybe we need to get really good at that. I'd love to hear him explain why he's done this. But what certainly is true is that once he started having success with it, pretty much everybody else seems to have followed.
What do you make of it, John?
Yeah, I mean, Arteta is the guy who bought Zinchenko, didn't he, to play left back and come into midfield to add extra midfielders, to swamp midfield in very much a Guardiola model. And now you've got Calafiori playing left back, right? And you've got Calafiori, you've got Timber on the other side. You've got height all over the team. You've also got some fantastic technical players in Zubimendi, in Odegaard, in actually Declan Rice. Let's credit him as a very good technical player as well. And then you've got the forward line as well, of which Gyökeres is probably the least technically gifted, but fits that model of the team that plays direct because he can hold the ball up. They are successful. They are successful in the traditional Arsenal model. This is the weird thing, isn't it? That we talk about tactical evolution. What you used to get with teams that would play quite direct football is that you would have players that could play a bit in the team. So the George Graham team of the late 80s, early 90s had players like Paul Davis. David Rocastle played every game in the season they won the title in 1989. Michael Thomas, Paul Merson, all those types of players could play, but they had that back four, and then he would have Alan Smith as the launching target, of course, for the balls played up by Lee Dixon, Nigel Winterburn, so on. And you might say Arsenal follow in a tradition, but a tradition that had been lost for quite a while. There was a point in late 80s football, and it's something Jonathan has written about, of this realization, and Don Howe, the previous manager, was an advocate of this, of the position of maximum opportunity. You take your chances, you work out set plays are going to be where your opportunities come. And then following that model, it's just modernized. And but you also have the influences of Guardiola still within that team. I think Arsenal could play possession football quite readily if they wanted to. When we talk about excitement in the Premier League, now one of my favourite players in the Premier League is Eze. Your worry is that he might get lost within a systems team, that a talent like that might not get to flourish, show off his talents in an Arteta team. But I don't think that's been the case. I think Arsenal can play both ways, but Arteta has worked out that with the schedule they've got, with various competitions, including Europe, this is the easiest way or the best way to do it, and they use the analytics, and they're pushed on forward. And no one could criticise their success in that. He had to find a way, as Jonathan said. It's about finding your edge to get an edge on your opponents, and he's done that. And when we talk about the imitation, well, the fact there are so many imitators shows the success of that as well.
Can I ask you, Jack? You've covered England much more closely than John or I. Gareth Southgate had this same realisation with the 2018 World Cup. Set plays are where you get maximum bang for your training ground buck, as it were. If you haven't got much time, this is a way of having a significant improvement. Why did he move away from that afterwards? Why didn't he just make England the Arsenal of the international game?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know if he consciously moved away from it. I definitely think he must have realised that the only in a format where you get very, very limited time with the players, it's the best way it's much easier to coach your way into scoring goals from corners than to coach your way into scoring goals from open play. Like, we know that coaching your way into scoring goals from open play in international football is really hard. Like, there are so many barriers to being able to play well in international football. You know, you're playing against a low block, often in the heat with players. Your players don't really know each other that well. And you're right, like England didn't really build on how good they were at set pieces compared, like they were so good in Russia, and then they didn't really continue to improve that. I mean, I would not be surprised at all if this is a big dominant theme in the World Cup next summer, simply because it's going to be played in 35-degree heat. The amount of actual football that teams will be able to play, plus they're effectively an extra round of games because it's the 48-team World Cup. It almost makes you wonder whether some of these guys, Nicholas Yver or Austin McPhee or whoever, might be getting a phone call to come and do set pieces for a team at international level.
McPhee's with Portugal, isn't he? He's working for Roberto Martinez.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't actually know that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. These dead ball specialists, they're for hire. They're freelancers. That's the weird thing. Look at Keith Andrews. There was a former set-piece specialist who is now a manager. Maybe this is the next coaching thing. Because set-piece is so important, you can actually manage a whole team, as happens in NFL. The defensive coordinator becomes, coach.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, there were a lot of people laughing about the era of the set-piece coach last season, and yet we are very much living in Nicholas Yver's world now. Like, these guys are the masters now, as proven by, as you say, as proven by Keith Andrews' promotion. The set pieces have become the game, and you wonder whether this is going to be a path into management for more of these guys. We're going to take a break now, and then after the break, we're going to come back to that question that Jonathan was hinting at earlier about why has football changed in this direction? Because I think it's come as a surprise to everyone. I think the really interesting thing to me about all this is that if you'd asked someone, even 2 years ago, about all the changes that had happened in football in the last 10 years, I think there was an assumption, possibly wrongly, or clearly wrongly, that the changes in English football towards becoming more technical, more possession-based, were basically hegemonic, right? That it was going to stay like this and become more so forever. That Pep had changed English football forever, and that I don't think anybody, and that insofar as there were changes, it was going to be changes becoming more technical, more quick. I don't think anybody would have expected football. Nobody would have expected this Deutsche Renaissance of set pieces, and yet the clock, and yet things have changed in a very different direction very, very quickly. over the course of the last 2 years, and we don't really. I don't really know why. I don't know why football has changed like this. Jonathan, you've got some theories on this. Why do you think football has moved in this unexpected and surprising direction?
I guess there's sort of a meta point to make here that essentially, I think football's development, you have a dominant style and then you have a challenge to it, and then those two styles sort of synthesize. I think what often happens is there is a way of playing that is maybe slightly forgotten, or because you've been pursuing one way of doing things, you lose the capacity to do that old thing. And then suddenly somebody reinvokes an old way of playing that people have forgotten how to deal with. My suspicion is part of what's happened, part of why set plays are so effective suddenly, is that because the Guardiola model was so hegemonic and has been for so long, I mean, nearly 2 decades, 15 years, that everybody's been playing out from the back. And so defenders get used to passing the ball. They get selected often for their capacity on the ball, particularly elite teams. And occasionally that means, I'm not saying it's not possible to pass the ball and also be a good defender, but sometimes the defensive qualities have not been prioritized. And so suddenly, if you're making them behave like a 1980 centre-back, they don't have a capacity to do that. So my suspicion is that over the next 3 or 4 years, there'll be a slight reversion and we'll get defenders again who are good in the air, who maybe aren't that great with their feet. And that will help deal with long throws, will help deal with corners. So that's theory one, which is sort of based on a general, this is how football evolves. I wish I could remember the Hegelian word for that, but there is a Hegelian term for it. I think possibly as financial inequalities have grown in football, we've become more used to the team with fewer resources playing with a low block. I think more like that has clearly happened. If you look at possession stats from sort of 20 years ago, you very rarely got one, even a very dominant team, very rarely had more than 60% possession. And now we don't think it's anything unusual if a team has 70% possession. If you play against a low block, one of the things that happens is you get a lot of free kicks and you get a lot of corners. And that's one of the things Arsenal fans point out this season. People go bang on about their set plays and say, well, how are we getting set plays? We're getting set plays by playing football, which is, up to a point is true. So if you've got a team of 5'7" technicians, as Barcelona did, the corners are kind of useless to you. What are you going to do with it? You take it short and set up exactly the same model of play again. Whereas if you've got incredibly sophisticated set play models where if the set play is actually what you want, if that's what you're best at, if that's your most efficient route to goal, well, that gives the sides who's playing a low block real pressure. We can't concede corners. We can't concede set plays. So those, I would say, are the two where I've got some degree of confidence that they are playing a part. The one that I think is slightly harder to explain, slightly wishy-washy, slightly, it sort of feels true, but I can't really sort of nail down a correlation, as specific factors, is I just sort of think the world has gone more direct. Big man in politics, big man on the pitch. So there's a very good piece by Joseph Heath, I don't know if you saw last week, where he was, Daniel Kahneman's theory of fast and slow thinking. I think Fast and Slow is Daniel Kahneman's famous book, where thinking slow is sort of paying attention, going through the evidence, constructing your argument. Thinking fast is just sort of intuitive way of thinking. And the world is basically, so Heath argues, the world is now set up for slow thinking, that every single act becomes bureaucratic. And God knows, if you try to get OpenReach to fit full fiber broadband, that is true. It is very, very slow. There's not much thinking, but it is very slow. And that he's saying part of what people are reacting against in the modern shift to populism and authoritarianism is this slow thinking model of the world, that they want something more intuitive. They want this fast and more direct way of doing things. And so I think you can, at some level, see the return to big centre forwards, the more direct, the simpler way of playing, is being a reaction against the sort of cosmopolitan theorizing of Guardiola.
What do you think, John?
What we're seeing, actually, from a media point of view, is certain managers that used to be called dinosaurs are coming back and saying, I told you so. I was right all along. There is a rival podcast called No Tippy Tappy Football. I think we know who the proprietor of that particular podcast is, Miss Samuel Allardyce, of course. And there's a Tony Pulis has a podcast as well. And we had this thing, didn't we, last week about Pep Guardiola talking about the Tony Pulis, how he was some sort of prophet of this and how you don't have to play this game. And the thing is, what I remember of that era of Allardyce and Pulis is you have to look at it also from that entertainment perspective and the fan perspective. And also the success of it. Okay. Now, Tony Pulis left Stoke in 2013 after establishing the club in the Premier League, did a great job, but the fans and the ownership became bored of it. This is it. They became bored of that style of football. I will tell you a story about an old friend of mine, no longer with us, who is a Blackburn fan. Now, he's a Blackburn fan from the era of Brian Douglas in the early 60s. Big fan of them in the 90s. Told me a great story about how one day he watched, his son went to Sheffield University with me, and he went to watch Blackburn at Hillsborough, got to the game early and watched. This is how the Blackburn team that won the title in 1995, this is how they practice. He watched the Ray Harford give the ball to David Batty and hit it left, right, to hit long balls that would be Jason Wilcox, Stuart Ripley. Now, actually, Blackburn played the football they played was quite exciting, wasn't it? He doesn't mind, he wasn't someone that hated long ball football. When he got to Allardyce, he said to me, when Allardyce leaves, we will get relegated, but I can't watch this football anymore. The fans did not, the innate conservatism that the Pulis Allardyce model had, you've got to wonder if Arteta and those that are pushing this style of football, this direct football, this use of set pieces, they wonder if the conservative aspect of it will eventually count against them with fans. If Arsenal don't win the league, and we think we probably will do, and they don't win the league next season playing that type of football, is there a point where Arsenal fans get bored of boring Arsenal and just think, at least it was better when we tried to play football? There is an aspect. Football is an entertainment franchise. There is a revisionism going on about this direct football. Now, I've made many jokes over the years on Guardian Football Weekly and elsewhere about getting it launched. The whole point of that is I just found it quite amusing when teams just smashed it long and went for it. It's just like, it was always a panic measure in football, right? That was it. You just get it launched and then, you head up to, and, I watched Kevin Francis at Stockport in the early 90s. Great to watch, entertainment, terrible football. I'll be quite honest about that, but fun at the same time. But now it's gone to like the top level, to elite teams playing that. I wonder how long-term a strategy it is. And I do think, I agree with Jonathan, there will be a hybrid at some point. It has to be. And I was going to say, Guardiola perhaps doesn't have the Arsenal within his team to do it, because who are the big players in his team? Well, there's Haaland, there's Donnarumma, there's maybe a couple of defenders. Do you think he would if he could? I'm not sure.
No, I think I'm not sure he can do another. People said this many times before. I suspect this is his last revolution at City. This incredibly, by his standards, very direct, very strangely kind of rudimentary team built on big experienced goalkeeper and kind of bizarrely big, physically imposing centre forward. Like it's never been like this before. Jonathan, do you agree that there is the space is being created for a kind of aesthetic counter-revolution at some point in the next few years? That's the space that teams will move into. Or the only reason that I might suspect that might not happen is that the kind of set piece ball is based on standard, particularly English standards of officiating, which make it very difficult to go back in that direction. Because if you try and put out a kind of, I'm thinking, like early 2010s Arsenal team with Arshavin and Nasri and Pleb and Fabregas, like they will just get, like modern Arsenal would annihilate that team on physicality, right? So maybe there isn't the space for that kind of team in the next few years.
Well, there is if refereeing is modified.
Right, yeah, but that's a precondition.
But it can happen. I mean, one of the reasons why we now have the more direct style, the more aggressive style, is what Ken Early would call the let it flow directive. And that was a self-conscious decision that people felt football had become too much based on craft and not enough on physicality. And there is a balance somewhere to be struck. Possibly it's now gone too far the other way. And I think one of the issues we've got as well is VAR. Very hard to know, but we do know that remind me, was it 2008 or it was 2012, wasn't it? In 2012 at the Euros was when we first got the officials behind the goals. And what you saw there was a number of goals from corners went up because defenders feared being called up for grappling or pulling. And then, everyone's, but the officials behind the goals don't do anything. Maybe they don't have to do anything. Maybe they just have to be there. I mean, that was the great genius of sort of Christian monarchs for years was, God's watching. I don't need a secret police. God will do it for me. But VAR now actually is watching. And maybe defenders just feel that they daren't quite get up to what they did get up to. Whereas forwards, of course, the downside is way less. Because even if the video shows they're committing a foul, so we had an example in the Fulham Manchester United game where United got a penalty for a foul in the box, and there was a foul being committed. I think the foul was on Mason Mount, and Luke Shaw was committing exactly the same foul, sort of 6 feet behind him. But VAR can only look at one of those two incidents. So the downside risk for defenders is way greater than the downside risk for forwards. That anything a defender does in the box could be checked because that could be a penalty, whereas the forward only gets checked if there's a goal. We've created a scenario where you're giving every benefit to forwards. You would allow them to have a 10-20% more physicality in the box because they're not going to give away a penalty. They might, if they're really unlucky, lead to a goal being disallowed, but it's almost never going to happen.
It's a question though. Forwards now seem to be bigger, right? So we've got your Gyökeres, you've got your Arlands, they're more physical. The quick forward, Pippo Inzaghi, those type of players, because offside with VAR is harder to get away with, isn't it?
That's a very good point. That is a very good point, yeah. Yeah, VAR again, it mitigates against that little quick forward towards
so the little quick
forward.
Your Chicharito, you name them. I mean, with Robbie Fowler, that type of player, that Michael Owen, that triggers the offside trap, that gets through the offside trap, is made extinct. So that, again, that adds to the physicality of football. And yeah, the refereeing, one of the things actually, I also think about this now, I think copying the Guardiola style of play, which we all decided was going to be the way forward for the game, is really, really hard. We've seen so many pale imitations of it, some grand failures. Probably the last of that might be Russell Martin at Rangers, which was, well, it gave us all a good laugh, and Rangers fans had a really bad time watching that. And, you've seen that just today. I mean, people trying to play that sort of progressive style football with still as, departed Southampton. Is it easier for coaches to just say, okay, if we operate on this direct, stats-based, long ball, set plays, is that some sort of cheat mode? Is it easier to have your team survive if you're good at that? Or is it that now that the elite focuses on that stuff, it's going to be harder because better players are now even more tuned in to set plays? I don't know the answer to that.
I definitely think that going toe-to-toe with, say, Manchester City, trying to play the same style of football with them with worse players is obviously going to be really hard. At the same time, I think that any, particularly for smaller teams, I think like replicability of style of play is so important that you can't just come up with a plan that succeeds against a team like City. You need something which you can do every single week. And the teams that overperform really are the ones with a distinctive identity. But that actually brings me back to the thing I wanted to kind of have in the final section of the podcast, which is, for all this talk about, as ever with these trends, like everybody thinks that the current trend is not just inevitable, but permanent, right? And it's, set pieces are here forever. There'll never be any football again, and so on. And yet it strikes me that Andoni Iraola's Bournemouth are really the kind of last best hope for actual attacking football in the Premier League, because here's a team that they spend more or less what they generate. They don't have a lot of the advantages that other big Premier League teams have. And yet, it feels like a long time ago now, and I think a lot of people needed a lot of convincing when Iraola got the job in the first place it was 2023. And yet, they have created for themselves a brand of very distinctive and adventurous attacking football, which is great to watch and has been really successful, and suggests that you don't necessarily need to it's not as simple as, well, you've either got to do Guardiola football or you've got to do set pieces. Like there's still a huge amount of space in the game for teams to find a new way of their own. And John, you've obviously been down to Dean Court more than most. What's your sense of like the distinctness and the uniqueness and perhaps even the kind of copyability of what Bournemouth have created?
I mean, I think that the main thing I find about watching Bournemouth regularly is just the speed with which things are done, and the fact that they're not a team to rest on the ball. They'll always go for it. They're very direct, lots of skill in the team, obviously very well coached over ball skills and the like. And of course, the work that's been done behind the scenes by previously Richard Hughes and is it Pinto? I think is the guy that's the overall guy in charge there. Of the back office. They're very good at finding players that fit the system. I think one aspect of it though is when you watch them week on week, as I have done, there is a fatigue aspect to it, to playing that game, and we saw it. Bournemouth around that period last season where they went 11, 12 games where they played brilliant football, and they were doing it with just 12 players actually quite a lot of the time because of the fatigue element and the injury element. I don't know if that is sustainable for a team that is going to play in Europe, for example. I'm not sure it is. If Bournemouth went into Europe next season, as is the ambition of the owner, Will Foley, you wonder what they're going to have to do to that squad. Whether Iraola is going to have to, if he is the manager, but still then, if he has to amend the style of play because it is very wearing. And as we saw it, I mean, he is among the many influences, Bielsa. And remember the Athletic team of 2012, who I think are one of the best teams I've ever seen play at Old Trafford. Absolutely brilliant. But by the end of that season, they were completely, they'd run themselves ragged. And we saw that with Leeds as well. Let's take an English example. And I wonder how long Bournemouth can last because the squad is still small. They've sold off players. They've brought in players who are inexperienced. I mean, they've got an 18-year-old centre-half is their reserve centre-half. But the thing about Bournemouth as well, and we talk about the entertainment franchise, they're the best team to watch in the Premier League. I'm privileged to go and watch them play. When they're on it, they're absolutely fantastic. There's those moments that they build up where there'll be 3 or 4 minutes where they just swarm all over a team and it's chance after chance after chance. And that's the style of football that we all like to watch being played, isn't it? And they are a credit to the Premier League. It's just whether that football works for the length of time that teams have to play over a long season on heavier pitches and all that.
And Jonathan, does the success of Bournemouth suggest that, and it's not just Bournemouth, but I think they're probably the best example, like this talk about the Premier League being boring now or there not being football played in the Premier League is kind of overdone, right? We have been overdoing it on this podcast.
It depends what you mean by boring. What do people want?
Well, what do you mean by boring? You know what the word means. Don't pretend like you don't know what the word means.
I mean, I'll be honest. I was slightly bored during City Bournemouth in the second half because it was obvious City were going to win, and it was sort of okay. I can write my piece. I can think what I'm going to write. In some ways, it's quite nice as a journalist when you know what's going to happen because you're not sort of writing on the hoof. But it didn't grip me as a contest in the way that Brentford v Liverpool had the previous week. Or, the game I went to before that was River Plate against Sarmiento, which in many ways was a terrible game of football, but Sarmiento won 1-0 and River fans, I think they had one shot, River had 16. And football was obviously of significantly lower quality than the Premier League. But if you got 85,000 people going mad because their team is losing against a minnow, that's great. Beyond a certain level of entertainment of a football, what matters is the storylines, what matters is a soap opera. Where I think there's been some confusion in the system is that, I guess we've talked about this, but previously we sort of thought, well, it's good to have a mix of styles in the Premier League and it's good that you have this sort of direct approach, set plays for the lesser teams. That's a way they can compete with the elite. Well, now the elite are using that, and it somehow just feels like a category error. And I think that's what's caused the consternation. But I'm also certain that if you look at every single season of the Premier League, at some point in the run-up to Christmas, somebody will have written, this is the most boring Premier League in history. Because you can find something boring in anything, like because the football doesn't suit you. Because definitely we've had this conversation when Pep ball was at its height of, well, there's no tackles in midfield now. It's just one team has an attack, the other team has an attack. This is somehow not real. There's always this golden age we're harking back to that never actually existed. When was the golden age? Probably, Eamon Dunphy would tell you it was late 60s, early 70s, because that's when there was a balance between physicality and technique. I'd be inclined to agree with him. But you read the newspapers and then people were moaning about it then as well. So people are right moaning bastards, basically, and they need to get over themselves. It's also, I think, something else that's happened is that I don't think we've ever known a style be as hegemonic as Guardiola football. And I think we've settled into the idea this is permanent, this is forever. And there's a bit of shock that, well, maybe that's not true. Is the football now more entertaining on some sort of abstract level than the Benitez Mourinho football of 2004-05? Yeah, obviously it is.
Of course it is.
And that football was pretty grinding to watch. Didn't matter because there were great storylines and that was all all we cared about. And we knew that 4 or 5 years down the line it would change and something else would happen. The difference is we had 15 years but didn't really change. And this now is a bit of a challenge to that. But I think change is good. I think evolution is... Let me just shock you. I'm in favour of evolution. If we hadn't had it, we'd still be amoeba.
Yeah, I think if I was the Premier League, I might be a bit worried by the fact that when it was City getting 100 points playing brilliant possession football, people said they were bored. And then when it was City and Liverpool both getting huge points tally simultaneously, both playing very good but distinctive brands of attacking football, people said they were bored by that. And now we're in a very different phase with different style of play and probably lower point total to win the league this year. And people say they're bored by that. It makes you think, what do people want? Like, what does... And I think all of these conversations have to be underpinned by a sense of what do we want the Premier League to look like? And I don't really think people have got people need to answer that question, John, don't they? What do we want the Premier League to look like before we can start to say these are the ways in which the Premier League falls down?
Well, I suppose people would like it to be 4 or 5 teams playing great football, taking points off each other and, a fight to the death to the end of the season. It doesn't quite work like that. And, the Guardiola v Klopp era was pretty glorious to the Premier League, you'd have to say. But for everyone else, it maybe wasn't so great. And listen, this season, is it really that bad? I mean, the promoted teams have done quite well. You've got your Bournemouths, you've got your Brightons, you've got, as Rory would call it, enough interesting things floating around there.
But you see, this is part of the issue, isn't it? That Liverpool have just bought a whole load of really exciting attacking players who are playing terribly. But if they were playing well, they'd be an attacking team. If City click back into gear, if Haaland scores 45 goals this season, that's interesting. If Chelsea actually got themselves in gear, they're not playing set-piece football, that would be great to watch. So partly it's just that the 3 or 4 of the teams who could play this exciting alternative, this more fluid alternative to Arsenal, just aren't playing very well at the minute. But what that means is Sunderland can go second. Bournemouth are in the Champions League places. And that also has an appeal.
But Jonathan, that reminds me of probably our early days in football where Liverpool would win the league and Southampton and Watford would come second, where it was just like, there'd be like a procession to the title or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been that season when Liverpool won the league by about 20 points from Graham Taylor's Watford in a real sort of direct homo phase. That must have been a bleak old season.
Yes, that was my memory of it. Yeah, I mean, I was very young at the time. And it may well be that Arsenal do something like that because the rest of them are struggling to get themselves together. As City are vulnerable, they've shown that several times this season already because they are over-reliant. We can't criticise Arsenal for getting it sorted, can we? That's the thing, and I think it would be unfair to do that. And this is the thing, again, the criticism of Guardiola probably wasn't a criticism of Guardiola, it was a criticism of the people trying to imitate them are not being as good at them at doing it. And that's where the issue lies. And, you know, I take exception to Sean Dyche is sort of, I was right all along. No, the teams that, you know, speak to Everton fans who were grateful to Sean Dyche for the job that he did in keeping him in the league when the team was going through, the club was going through endless turmoil. But the fact there was a great sigh of relief when he left. And the fact that David Moyes was seen as Mr. Progressive when Dyche has gone will tell you quite a lot.
I can't believe we're slagging off Dyche in this of all weeks when he's come out in favour of inverting the pyramid. I think every word that comes from Dyche's mouth is a solid gold gospel truth.
I'm particularly keen that we should end this episode now that Wilson's started plugging his books, which is so I think this is an appropriate place to draw a line. But thank you very much to everyone for listening. Thank you to John and Jonathan and to producer Tom. We will be back again later this week. Not sure what the topic is or who's talking about it, but if you can find us all in the usual places on Friday.